My mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye at their dinner table and said I'd never be able to afford their lifestyle, that I should be grateful they let someone like me into their family. She had no idea that for the past 3 years, I'd been the one secretly covering their mortgage, their car payments, and keeping their perfect suburban dream from collapsing. But what happens when the truth comes out and the person who's been looking down on you realizes you're the only reason they still have a roof over their head? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Hartley family home sat on Maple Ridge Drive like a crown jewel, a sprawling colonial with white pillars, manicured hedges, and that particular shade of cream paint that screamed old money. Every time I pulled into that circular driveway, I felt the weight of judgment before I even turned off my car. My beat-up Honda Civic looked like an intruder next to Richard's Lexus and Barbara's Mercedes SUV. I'm Stella Gonzalez, and 3 years ago, I married into what I thought was the American dream. My husband, David Hartley, was everything I'd hoped for: kind, intelligent, supportive. But his family? That was a different story entirely. The Sunday dinners were mandatory. Not suggested, not invited, mandatory. Barbara Hartley, my mother-in-law, had made that crystal clear from the beginning. Family is everything, she'd say with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. We gather every Sunday at 6, sharp. That particular Sunday in October started like all the others. I arrived at 5:45, carrying the homemade empanadas I'd spent 3 hours perfecting. David was already there, having driven separately from his office. His father, Richard, sat in his leather armchair reading the Wall Street Journal. Barbara was in the kitchen, orchestrating dinner with military precision. "You're late," Barbara said as I entered through the side door. I glanced at the clock. 5:48, 12 minutes early. Traffic was, I started. "What are those?" She nodded toward my dish with the kind of polite disdain she'd mastered over decades of garden club meetings. "Empanadas," I thought. How thoughtful. She took the container without looking at it and placed it on the far corner of the counter, away from the other dishes. "We're having pot roast tonight, traditional Sunday dinner." Traditional meant Barbara's way. Traditional meant the food she approved of, the conversations she directed, the life she'd mapped out for her eldest son, a life that hadn't included someone like me. I'd met David at a hospital fundraiser where I'd been working as a financial consultant for their expansion project. He'd been there representing his family's foundation, the Hartley Foundation, established by his grandfather in 1962, dedicated to community, development, and local business support. We'd bonded over our shared love of architecture and old movies. He'd never mentioned that his family lived in the kind of house I'd only seen in magazines. Our courtship was a whirlwind. David was different from his parents, grounded, unpretentious, genuinely kind. He worked as a civil engineer for the city, a job his mother considered beneath the family name, but one he was passionate about. When he proposed after 8 months, I said yes without hesitation. The problems started immediately. Barbara had opinions about the engagement ring, rather modest, and the wedding venue. Couldn't we use the country club? She had opinions about my dress, my family's traditions, my work schedule. But she saved her sharpest observations for my background. My parents had immigrated from Mexico when I was 5. My father worked construction, my mother cleaned houses. They saved every penny to put me through state college. I'd worked 2 jobs, earned scholarships, and built a successful career in financial consulting. I was proud of my journey. Barbara saw it as a deficit. "Different backgrounds can be challenging in a marriage," she'd said during one of our first private conversations. "The Hartleys have certain expectations." What she meant was clear. I wasn't one of them. Dinner that October evening followed the usual script. We sat at the formal dining table, Barbara at one end, Richard at the other, David and I on one side, David's younger brother Marcus and his wife Lauren on the other, the good china, the crystal glasses. The silverware I still wasn't entirely sure I was using correctly. Richard held court, discussing the stock market and local real estate development. Marcus talked about his promotion at the law firm. Lauren mentioned their upcoming vacation to Martha's Vineyard. Barbara beamed at them like they were Renaissance paintings come to life. Then she turned to me. "Stella, David mentioned you've been working quite a bit lately. How is that little job of yours going?" "Little job?" I managed investment portfolios worth millions. I had clients across 3 states. But to Barbara, anything I did was diminutive. "It's going well," I said evenly. "I just closed a major contract with—" "That's nice, dear. She cut me off with a smile. Of course, once you and David start a family, you'll want to step back from work. Children need their mother at home. I always say career women miss the most precious years. David squeezed my hand under the table. We'd been trying to start a family for 2 years. It was the one topic that brought me to tears in private, the one wound I couldn't seem to heal. And somehow, Barbara always managed to press directly on it. We're not quite there yet, I said quietly. Well, don't wait too long. Biology waits for no one. Barbara took a delicate sip of wine. Of course, raising children properly requires certain resources, the right neighborhood, the right schools. It's expensive maintaining the lifestyle children deserve. We'll manage, David said, an edge in his voice. Will you? Barbara's smile sharpened. This house alone costs more to maintain than most people make in a year. The property taxes, the landscaping, the club memberships, it adds up. I'd hate to see you two struggle trying to provide for grandchildren the way they should be provided for. My stomach tightened. This was new territory, even for Barbara. We're doing fine, Mom, David said firmly. Are you? She looked directly at me now, her blue eyes calculating. Because I notice you're still driving that little Honda. You're still renting that apartment in the old district. David could have stayed in the guest house here, you know. We offered, but you insisted on that rental. The guest house was a glorified studio above their garage. The old district was a vibrant neighborhood I loved. But in Barbara's world, anything less than Maple Ridge Drive was poverty. We like our independence, us? I said. Independence. Barbara laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's a lovely word for living paycheck to paycheck. You do realize what you married into, don't you? The Hartley name means something in this town. It comes with expectations, standards. Barbara, Richard said quietly, a warning. She ignored him. I'm just being realistic. You seem like a sweet girl, Stella, but let's be honest about the situation. You'll never be able to afford this lifestyle, not on what you make. This family has maintained a certain standard for 3 generations, and that's enough. David stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Stella is my wife. She's part of this family, and how we live our lives is none of your concern. The table went silent. Marcus stared at his plate. Lauren suddenly became fascinated with her napkin. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Barbara's composure never cracked. Sit down, David. I'm simply stating facts. There's no shame in it. Not everyone can maintain this level of... I said that's enough. We left early that night. David barely spoke on the drive home, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat in silence, Barbara's words echoing in my head. You'll never be able to afford this lifestyle. If only she knew. If only she knew that every month for the past 3 years, I'd been transferring money from my account to hers. If only she knew that the pristine house on Maple Ridge Drive, the one she was so proud of, was still standing because of me. If only she knew that Richard's successful investments had failed 2 years ago, that their retirement account had been decimated, that they were drowning in debt they'd hidden behind designer clothes and country club smiles. If only she knew that the person she looked down on was the only thing standing between the Hartley family and financial ruin. But she didn't know. Not yet. And I wasn't sure if I should ever tell her. 3 years earlier, I'd stumbled onto the Hartley family's secret completely by accident. David and I had been married for 6 months. We were living in our apartment downtown, the one Barbara called charming in that tone that really meant inadequate. It was a Saturday morning in January, bitter cold, and David had gotten called into an emergency city council meeting about a bridge inspection. I'd promised to pick up some documents Richard needed from his home office, something about tax papers his accountant was waiting for. Barbara and Richard were at their winter retreat in Scottsdale. The house was empty. They'd given us the alarm code and explicit instructions about which filing cabinet to check. I found the tax documents easily enough, but as I was closing the drawer, a folder slipped from the back and fell to the floor, spilling papers across the Persian rug. That's when I saw it, a letter from Westside National Bank marked "Final Notice" in red letters. I should have just picked it up and put it back. I should have respected their privacy, but the amount on that letter made my hands go numb. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 45 days if payment of $87,000 wasn't received immediately. The Hartleys were 4 months behind on their mortgage. I sat on the floor of Richard's office, surrounded by fallen documents, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. This was the Hartley family, the ones who'd lived in this house for 32 years, the ones who donated to charity galas and sponsored Little League teams, the ones whose name was on a bronze plaque at the hospital. I started going through the other papers that had fallen, not snooping, just trying to understand. There were credit card statements with balances in the tens of thousands, collection notices from medical billing companies, a letter from their country club about overdue membership fees, investment statements showing accounts that had been liquidated at massive losses. The picture came together slowly, like a puzzle I didn't want to complete. Richard's commercial real estate investments had collapsed during the downturn. He'd leveraged everything, convinced the market would recover quickly. It hadn't. The Hartley Foundation, the family's source of pride, was being kept alive by loans they couldn't afford. Richard's health issues 2 years prior had resulted in medical bills their insurance hadn't fully covered. They'd been robbing Peter to pay Paul, using credit cards to make minimum payments on other credit cards, refinancing the house twice to stay afloat. And through it all, they'd maintained the facade. The dinner parties, the country club, the luxury cars, the perfect image of generational wealth. I carefully returned everything to the filing cabinet exactly as I'd found it. I took the tax documents to their accountant as promised, and I didn't say a word to David. For 3 days I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that red final notice stamp. I kept imagining what would happen if the Hartleys lost the house. Not because I cared about their pride. After 6 months of Barbara's barely concealed disdain, I had no illusions about where I stood in her estimation. But David loved that house. It was where he'd grown up, where every Christmas morning had happened, where his grandmother had taught him to play piano in the front room. More than that, the humiliation would destroy Richard. For all his faults, the man had genuine medical issues. The stress of public financial failure could literally kill him. And Barbara? She'd never recover from the shame. Her entire identity was wrapped up in the Hartley name, the Hartley legacy, the Hartley position in society. I ran the numbers on my own finances. I'd been aggressive about saving since college, a habit born from watching my parents stretch every dollar. My consulting business was thriving. I had investments, a healthy emergency fund, and no debt except David's student loans, which we were paying down ahead of schedule. I could help them. The question was whether I should. My phone rang on the 4th day. It was Barbara calling from Arizona. "Stella, dear, I hope the tax documents arrived safely at Mr. Peterson's office." They did. I dropped them off Saturday afternoon. "Wonderful. And you didn't have any trouble finding them?" There was something in her voice, a tightness, a worry she was trying to conceal. "No trouble at all," I said. A pause, then, "You didn't need to look through anything else?" She knew, or suspected. Maybe she'd noticed the filing cabinet wasn't exactly as she'd left it. Maybe she was just paranoid about their secrets. "Just the tax folder you specified," I assured her. Another pause. Good. Richard is very particular about his filing system." After we hung up, I made my decision. I called Westside National Bank and asked to speak with someone about the Hartley account. After explaining I was family and wanted to help with the delinquent payments, I was transferred to a manager named Helen Pritchard. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm not sure what you've been told about the situation." "I'm not Mrs. Hartley," I interrupted. "I'm the daughter-in-law, and I'd like to make arrangements to bring the account current." Helen was silent for a moment. "That's very generous, but we're talking about a substantial amount." "I'm aware. Can we set up automatic payments for my business account? I'd like this to be done discreetly. The account holders don't need to know where the payments are coming from." "That's highly unusual." "But possible." Another pause. "Possible, yes. But Mrs. Gonzalez, I have to ask, are you sure about this? This is a significant financial commitment." I wasn't sure. Not remotely. But I thought about David finding out his childhood home had been foreclosed on. I thought about the stress it would put on our new marriage. I thought about becoming the person Barbara could blame for her son's unhappiness when his family fell apart. "I'm sure," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Helen to structure the arrangement. My business account would automatically pay the Hartley mortgage each month. The bank would process it as if it came from their own accounts. Richard and Barbara would see payments being made, but they wouldn't know the source. As far as they knew, some accounting miracle or delayed investment return had saved them. The catch was that I had to bring the account current immediately. $87,000. I liquidated a third of my investment portfolio. I pulled from savings, I called it a business restructuring in my own records, kept it separate from my personal accounts with David, and wired the money. When the Hartleys returned from Arizona in February, Richard seemed lighter somehow, less gray. He mentioned at Sunday dinner that some investments had finally matured, and they'd been able to catch up on a few things. Barbara smiled and squeezed his hand. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them had any idea. But it didn't stop there. Once I'd opened that door, once I'd seen the full extent of their financial disaster, I couldn't unsee it. The country club dues were next. I found out through casual conversation that they were months behind, risking membership cancellation. Another call, another discreet arrangement, another monthly payment from my business account. Then, Richard's car payment. The lease had been on the verge of repossession, then the property taxes, then the medical bills that were threatening to go to collections and destroy their credit completely. Each time I told myself it was the last one. Each time, I justified it as protecting David, protecting our marriage, preventing the catastrophic stress that would come from his family's public failure. I set up a separate spreadsheet to track it all. Category: family assistance. Monthly total, averaging $6,300. Annual cost, $75,600. For context, that was more than my father had earned in his best year of construction work. And I did it without telling David. Not because I didn't trust him, but because David would have insisted on confronting his parents. He would have demanded they accept help openly, as family should. He would have stripped away the dignity they were clinging to, the facade that was literally the only thing keeping Richard's blood pressure from killing him. I convinced myself I was being merciful, practical, strategic. The truth was more complicated. Part of me wanted to prove Barbara wrong without her knowing it. Part of me wanted to be indispensable. Part of me was terrified that if the Hartley family fell apart, David would blame me somehow, would wish he'd married someone from their world who could have helped without it being charity. And part of me, the part I didn't like to examine too closely, was buying something. Not love, not acceptance, but maybe the moral high ground, the unassailable position of the person who'd sacrificed without recognition, who'd been the bigger person while being treated as smaller. The arrangement worked surprisingly well for 3 years. The Hartleys never questioned their good fortune. Richard seemed to believe his own story about delayed investments and market recoveries. Barbara certainly never looked beneath the surface. Why would she? She was convinced the Hartley name itself was worth something tangible, that their family wealth was as solid as the marble countertops in their kitchen. My business thrived, which made the payments manageable. I took on extra contracts, worked longer hours, built my client base. The money I sent to the Hartleys each month hurt, but it didn't break me. I was good at what I did, and I made sure I was compensated accordingly. David never noticed the discrepancy in our finances because I handled all our budgeting. He trusted me completely. When I said we needed to be careful about spending, he assumed it was my natural frugality, the habits learned from immigrant parents who'd stretched every dollar. He never questioned why we couldn't afford to move to a bigger apartment or why I kept driving my old Honda. How could he? His wife was careful with money, responsible, practical, all good qualities. He didn't know that the reason we couldn't save for our own house was because I was saving his parents' house. He didn't know that the reason we postponed vacations was because I was paying for their country club where they socialized without us. He didn't know that every time his mother made a comment about our modest lifestyle, I was swallowing rage at the irony of her criticism. But the secret was beginning to weigh on me. Every Sunday dinner was an exercise in self-control. Every backhanded comment from Barbara landed differently when I knew the truth. Every time she implied I was beneath their standards, I wanted to slam my bank statements on the table and watch her face change. I never did, of course. Because what would that accomplish? It would destroy Richard's fragile health. It would humiliate Barbara beyond recovery. It would force David to choose between his wife and his parents. It would turn my sacrifice into a weapon, my generosity into a bludgeon. So I stayed silent. I smiled through the dinners. I accepted the criticisms. I let Barbara Hartley look down on the woman who was literally keeping her life from collapsing, until that October evening when she pushed too far. "You'll never be able to afford this lifestyle." The words had been a match to kindling. All the restraint, all the silent nobility, all the careful justifications I'd constructed. They'd cracked that night. As David drove us home in silence, as Barbara's words echoed in my head, I made a different kind of decision. I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. But I was going to stop pretending their condescension didn't hurt. I was going to stop accepting their judgment as if it were valid. I was going to stop sacrificing pieces of my dignity, along with my monthly bank transfers. And if the truth ever came out, when it came out, I wasn't going to apologize for it. The question wasn't whether Barbara would eventually discover what I'd been doing. Secrets this big never stayed buried forever. The question was what would happen when she learned that the woman she'd dismissed, the daughter-in-law she'd tolerated with barely concealed disdain, was the only reason her perfect world still existed at all. The Monday after that disastrous dinner, I sat in my home office staring at my computer screen, unable to focus on the financial report that was due by noon. David had left early for a site inspection, kissing my forehead and muttering something about his mother being impossible lately, as if Barbara's condescension was a new development rather than a 3-year marathon of subtle digs and not-so-subtle judgments. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Mija, are you coming for dinner Wednesday? Your father wants to make his carne asada." I smiled despite my mood. Wednesday dinners at my parents' small house in the Riverside neighborhood were the opposite of Sunday dinners at the Hartleys. No formal dining room, no crystal glasses, no judgment about which fork to use. Just my parents, my younger sister Anna, her husband Mike, and whatever neighbors happened to stop by. Loud, chaotic, warm, real. "Wouldn't miss it," I texted back. Another buzz. This one made my stomach drop. Helen Pritchard from Westside National Bank. "Stella, we need to discuss the Hartley account. Can you call me today?" I dialed immediately. Helen answered on the first ring. "Thanks for calling back so quickly. I wanted to give you a heads up before the statement goes out. Richard Hartley tried to refinance again last week." My chest tightened. Refinance? The house? He approached 3 different lenders. All of them ran credit checks. All of them denied him. On what grounds? His debt-to-income ratio is still problematic despite your payments. The credit card balances, the medical collections that keep appearing. He's been trying to consolidate, but no one will touch him. Helen paused. "Stella, I don't think he understands that your payments are the only reason they haven't lost the house already. He seems to believe they're financially solvent." Of course he did. That was the whole point of my arrangement, to let them maintain their dignity, their illusion of stability. "How bad are the credit cards now?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Papers rustled on her end. "The statements I've seen. He's maxed out at least 4 cards. There's a new one from last month. Diamond Reserve, 25,000 limit. He's already at 18,000. I did the math quickly. The Hartleys were spiraling deeper into debt despite my intervention. My payments covered the mortgage, the car, the property taxes, the country club. But I couldn't control their spending, couldn't stop Richard from using credit cards to maintain the lifestyle, couldn't prevent Barbara from buying whatever kept up appearances. "There's something else," Helen said carefully. "One of the lenders he approached called me to verify payment history. I maintained confidentiality about the source of funds, but the inquiry itself raises questions. If he keeps shopping for refinancing, eventually someone's going to dig deeper into where the mortgage payments are actually coming from." I understand. "Stella, I have to ask again, how long are you planning to maintain this arrangement?" I looked around my small home office, at the secondhand desk I'd bought from a yard sale, at the laptop I'd been using for 4 years because upgrading seemed frivolous when I was sending $6,000 a month to a family that looked down on me. "I don't know," I admitted. After we hung up, I opened my separate spreadsheet, the one David didn't know existed. 3 years of payments, categorized and color-coded. The numbers stared back at me like an accusation. Total paid to Hartley family expenses, $226,800, nearly $250,000. Money that could have been a down payment on our own house. Money that could have paid for the fertility treatments we'd been putting off. Money that could have been our security, our future, our children's education. Instead, it had gone to maintaining the facade of a family that treated me like I wasn't good enough to breathe their air. My office phone rang. Work? A client with questions about their portfolio. I pushed the Hartley situation aside and did my job, because at least at work, my competence was never questioned. Wednesday evening at my parents' house was exactly the chaos I needed. My father had outdone himself with the carne asada, and the small backyard was full of neighbors and friends. Anna cornered me by the grill, her 8-month pregnant belly making it impossible for me to escape. "You look stressed," she said, loading her plate with rice and beans. "More than usual. What's going on?" Anna was 4 years younger, but infinitely wiser about family politics. She'd married Mike, a high school history teacher, in a backyard ceremony that had cost $3,000 and was more joyful than most weddings I'd attended at the country club. David's mother, I said, which was explanation enough. What did the Ice Queen do now? Told me I'd never be able to afford their lifestyle, that I should be grateful they let someone like me into the family. Anna's face darkened. That entitled? It's fine. It's not fine, Stella. You've been dealing with her attitude for 3 years. When are you going to tell her where she can shove her opinions? Never, I thought. Because if I started, I wouldn't be able to stop. And the truth I'd been hiding was too nuclear to deploy in casual conversation. My mother appeared with a plate of tortillas. What are you two talking about so seriously? David's mother being a snob, Anna said bluntly. My mother's expression shifted into something diplomatic. She'd met Barbara twice, once at the wedding, once at a disastrous lunch I'd organized, hoping they'd find common ground. They hadn't. Some people measure worth in money, my mother said quietly. Others measure it in character. Barbara Hartley has chosen her measuring stick. You don't have to accept her measurements. But she makes David uncomfortable, I said. Every time she criticizes me, he has to choose between defending me and keeping peace with his mother. Then he should choose you, Anna said firmly. Every time, without hesitation. My father joined us, wiping barbecue sauce from his hands. Who should choose what? David should stand up to his mother more, Anna explained. My father looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen me through every crisis of my life. Mija, does David know what you do for his family? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I may not have gone to college, but I understand money. You work hard, you make good money, but you and David don't live like people with your combined income. You drive an old car, you rent an apartment, you don't take vacations. He paused. Where does the money go? My mother and Anna were both staring at me now. I felt heat rise in my face. We're saving, I said weakly. For what? My father's tone was gentle but insistent. Stella, I know my daughter. You're generous, sometimes too generous. Are you helping David's family? The truth sat on my tongue, 3 years of secrets wanting to spill out. But saying it out loud here, to my parents who'd scraped by their entire lives, who'd never had the luxury of hiding financial problems behind designer clothes and country club memberships, it felt like betrayal. Not of the Hartleys, but of my own family. We help them sometimes, I admitted carefully. They've had some difficulties. My father nodded slowly. And David knows about this help? My silence was answer enough. Stella. My mother's voice carried disappointment. Secrets in marriage? It's complicated, Mama. It's only complicated if you make it complicated, Anna interjected. Either you're a team with David or you're not. You can't protect him from his own family. But that was exactly what I was doing. Protecting David from the knowledge that his family's stability was purchased with his wife's money. Protecting Richard from health-destroying stress. Protecting Barbara from the humiliation of exposure. Protecting everyone except myself. I need to tell him, I said quietly. Yes, my father agreed. You do. Before the secret becomes worse than the truth. I meant to tell David that night. I rehearsed the conversation in my head during the drive home, planned the words, imagined his reactions. But when I walked into our apartment and found him on the couch, exhausted from a 14-hour day, the words stuck in my throat. Rough day? I asked instead. The bridge inspection found more problems than expected. The city council is in crisis mode. He pulled me down next to him. How is your family? Good, loud, lots of carne asada. He smiled. I love your family dinners. Everyone's so present. No performances, no keeping up appearances. The irony of that statement nearly made me laugh. David, we need to talk about Sunday, about what your mother said. His smile faded. I know, I'm sorry. She was completely out of line. She's been out of line for 3 years. I know. He ran his hands through his hair. I've tried talking to her. She just doesn't see it. In her mind, she's being honest, practical. She thinks she's doing me a favor by pointing out the realities of our financial situation. What realities? I asked carefully. We're doing fine. Are we? He looked at me with concern. Stella, I know you work incredibly hard. I know you make good money, but we can't seem to get ahead. We're still in this apartment. You're still driving a car that's older than our marriage. Every time I suggest we look at houses or take a vacation, you say we need to wait. Because I'm paying your parents' mortgage? I wanted to scream. Because I'm covering their country club dues and their car payments and keeping their entire life from falling apart while your mother tells me I'll never afford their lifestyle. We're being responsible, I said instead. Or my family is right and I married you for love without thinking practically about the future. He said it gently, but the words landed like blows. Maybe Mom has a point about the lifestyle differences. Do you believe that? My voice came out sharper than I intended. No, God, no, but Stella, I see how hard you work, and I wonder if you're struggling more than you tell me. If you're too proud to admit that combining our lives means you can't maintain the same savings rate you had before. He thought I was struggling. He thought I was too proud to admit financial difficulty. Meanwhile, I was subsidizing his family's entire existence. The truth was right there, begging to be spoken. But looking at David's tired face, at the concern in his eyes, at the man who loved me despite his mother's objections, I couldn't do it. Not tonight, not like this. I'm not struggling, I said firmly. We're building our future. It just takes time. He kissed my forehead. I know. And I'm sorry my mother can't see your worth. I'm sorry she makes you feel like you're not enough. I'm too much, I thought. I'm so much more than she knows, and that's the problem. The following Sunday, Barbara called to invite us to a special family dinner. We're celebrating, she said brightly. Richard has some wonderful news. My stomach nodded. Wonderful news in the Hartley household usually meant something that would cost money they didn't have. David and I arrived to find the dining room decorated with flowers and champagne glasses already poured. Marcus and Lauren were there, looking equally confused. Richard stood at the head of the table, beaming. Thank you all for coming on short notice, he said, raising his glass. I wanted to share some exciting news with the family. After months of negotiations, I've been approved to join the board of Riverside Development Corporation. It's an honor and a tremendous opportunity. Everyone applauded. Barbara glowed with pride. David looked genuinely happy for his father. I did mental calculations. Board positions at major development corporations came with expectations, charity donations, entertaining clients, upgraded wardrobes, increased social obligations, all things that cost money Richard didn't have. That's not all, Richard continued. The board position comes with certain professional requirements. We'll need to upgrade our membership at the club, do some entertaining. Barbara and I have decided to do some renovations on the house, update the kitchen, redo the master suite. First impressions matter in business. My champagne glass felt heavy in my hand. Renovations, upgrades, more spending on top of debt they couldn't see because I'd been covering it. Dad, that's ambitious, Marcus said carefully. Are you sure now is the right time for major renovations? Marcus, opportunity doesn't wait for convenient timing, Richard replied. The Hartley name means something. We maintain standards. Barbara turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, some of us understand that maintaining standards requires resources. Not everyone can appreciate what it takes to uphold a family legacy. The barb was clear. Even in celebration, she couldn't resist reminding me of my place. David's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. Support without confrontation. But something inside me shifted in that moment. I looked around the dining room, at the family celebrating success built on hidden subsidies, at Barbara's smug satisfaction, at Richard's oblivious confidence. They were planning renovations while I paid their mortgage. They were upgrading their lifestyle while I drove a car with 160,000 miles on it, and I realized my father had been right. The secret had become worse than the truth. I couldn't do this anymore. Not because I couldn't afford it, though the financial burden was becoming unsustainable. But because every month I enabled this fiction, I participated in my own diminishment. Every payment I made in silence was acceptance of Barbara's assessment of my worth. The question wasn't whether to tell them anymore. The question was when and how, and whether my marriage would survive the revelation. Because one thing was certain, the truth, when it came out, would detonate the Hartley family's carefully constructed world. And I was no longer sure I cared about protecting them from the blast. 2 weeks after Richard's celebration dinner, I sat across from Thomas Chen, the senior partner at Meridian Investment Group, in a downtown restaurant where the cheapest entree cost $45. Thomas was offering me the opportunity of a lifetime. We want you to come on as a full partner, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Equity stake, your name on the letterhead, full benefits package. You'd be managing the West Coast portfolio, $700 million in assets. I opened the folder with shaking hands. The compensation package was stunning. Base salary triple what I made now, plus profit sharing, plus the equity stake that would vest over 5 years. This was the career leap I'd been working toward since I'd started my consulting business 8 years ago. There's one requirement, Thomas continued. Partnership buy-in. Standard for our firm. We need to know partners are committed, that they have skin in the game. I found the number at the bottom of the second page. Partnership buy-in. $150,000, due within 90 days of acceptance. My mouth went dry. I know it's substantial, Thomas said, misreading my expression. But Stella, you're worth it. Your portfolio performance is exceptional. Your clients trust you. This is your future we're talking about. It was my future. The career I'd dreamed about, the validation I'd worked for, the opportunity that would change everything for David and me. With this partnership, we could buy a house, start fertility treatments, build the life we'd been postponing. There was just one problem. I didn't have $150,000. Not anymore. I'd given it to the Hartleys. Can I have some time to think about it? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Of course. Take 2 weeks. But Stella, opportunities like this don't come around twice. I drove home in a daze, Thomas's folder on the passenger seat like an accusation. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was calculating how much money I'd need to liquidate, how much debt I'd need to take on, whether I could even qualify for a loan given my current cash flow situation. David was home when I arrived, cooking dinner in our tiny kitchen. The apartment suddenly felt even smaller, more cramped. Other women my age with my career trajectory were living in actual houses. They were starting families. They weren't driving decade-old Hondas and renting apartments because they were secretly funding their in-laws' lifestyle. You look intense, David said, kissing my cheek. Rough day? I got offered a partnership at Meridian. His face lit up. Stella, that's incredible. That's what you've been working toward. There's a buy-in requirement. How much? $150,000. His smile faltered. That's substantial. Do we have that? No, I wanted to say. We don't. Because I've spent more than that keeping your parents' house from being foreclosed on while your mother tells me I'll never afford her lifestyle. I'd need to liquidate investments, I said carefully. Take out a loan, probably. But it's worth it, right? This is your career. We'll make it work. He pulled me into a hug. I'm so proud of you. His pride felt like glass in my chest. He was proud of what I'd accomplished while having no idea what I'd sacrificed to keep his family afloat. No idea that the reason we couldn't easily access $150,000 was because I'd already spent that amount and more on people who looked down on me. The next morning, I called Helen Pritchard again. I need to know exactly how much I've paid to the Hartley accounts over the past 3 years. Everything, down to the penny. Helen was quiet for a moment. Stella, are you reconsidering the arrangement? Just send me the total. The email arrived an hour later. I opened the spreadsheet with my office door locked. Total disbursements to Hartley family accounts, $248,350. I stared at the number until it lost meaning. $248,350, almost $250,000, nearly $100,000 more than the partnership buy-in I couldn't afford. My desk phone rang. My assistant's voice. Stella, Richard Hartley is on line 2 for you. My heart stopped. Richard had never called me at work. In 3 years of marriage, we'd barely had a conversation that wasn't at Sunday dinner. Richard, hi, what can I do for you? Stella, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. His voice was warm, friendly, the tone he used at charity events. I wanted to run something by you. David mentioned you're in financial consulting, and Barbara suggested you might have some advice. The irony was suffocating. What kind of advice? Well, with the renovation starting next month, we're looking at our overall financial picture. Making sure everything's organized, you know. I was wondering if you could recommend someone to review our accounts, maybe help us consolidate some things. He wanted me to recommend a financial advisor to help organize accounts I'd been secretly funding for 3 years, to possibly expose the very arrangement that had been keeping them afloat. Richard, I stopped, choosing words carefully. Are you concerned about your current financial situation? Oh no, nothing like that. Just want to be smart about things, especially with the board position. Need to present a certain image, keep things tidy." He paused. "Between you and me, Barbara worries sometimes. She grew up with money, you know. She doesn't quite understand that wealth requires management, attention to detail. I thought maybe someone with your expertise could help put her mind at ease." Barbara worries. Barbara, who told me 2 weeks ago that I'd never afford their lifestyle, was worried about money. Because somewhere beneath the denial and the appearances, she knew. Maybe not the extent, maybe not the specifics, but she knew things weren't right. "I'll email you some names," I said. "Wonderful. And Stella? I know Barbara can be particular, but she means well. She just wants the best for David." After we hung up, I sat in my office chair, staring at the spreadsheet of payments, and I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd finally seen the absurdity of their situation clearly. I was being asked to help organize finances I'd been secretly rescuing, by people who didn't respect me enough to believe I could afford their lifestyle. While facing a career opportunity I couldn't take because I'd given them my money, the house of cards was collapsing, and I was the only one who could see it. That evening, David's brother Marcus called my cell phone directly. Another first. "Stella, I need to talk to you about something. Can we meet for coffee without David or my parents?" We met the next morning at a cafe near my office. Marcus looked uncomfortable, stirring his coffee repeatedly without drinking it. "I don't know how to say this," he began, "so I'm just going to be direct. Are you and David helping my parents financially?" My stomach dropped. "What makes you ask that?" "Lauren handles our finances. She's an accountant. She notices things. We've been wondering for a while how my parents are maintaining their lifestyle. My dad's investments went south years ago. I'm not supposed to know that, but I do. The foundation is struggling. He had major medical bills. And yet they're planning renovations? Upgrading club memberships?" I said nothing, letting him continue. "Then last week, I saw something strange. I was at their house helping Dad with something in his office, and I noticed the mortgage statement on his desk. It showed payments made, regular as clockwork, account current. But Stella, I know my dad. I know he was in trouble. There's no way he pulled out of that hole on his own." Marcus looked at me directly. "Is it you? Are you paying their mortgage?" The secret I'd kept for 3 years sat between us like a live grenade. I could deny it, deflect, protect the arrangement a little longer. Instead, I said, "Yes." Marcus closed his eyes. "Jesus, how much?" "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters, because my parents are about to spend a fortune on renovations they can't afford, and apparently you're the only thing standing between them and foreclosure." He leaned forward. "Stella, why? Why would you do this?" "Because I found out 3 years ago that they were about to lose the house. Because I couldn't let David's childhood home be foreclosed on. Because your father's health couldn't take the stress. Because—" I stopped, my voice breaking. "Because I thought I was helping." "Does David know?" "No." "Are you insane?" Marcus's voice rose, then he caught himself, lowering it. "You've been secretly funding our parents for 3 years. They treat you like you're not good enough to be part of this family, and David doesn't even know?" I was trying to protect him. "From what? From knowing his parents need help?" "Stella, that's not protection, that's—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "How are you even affording this? You can't tell me this isn't destroying your finances." "It's manageable." "Manageable?" My parents live in a house that probably costs $6,000 a month just for the mortgage. That's not including taxes, insurance, maintenance, the country club. He stopped, eyes widening. "Oh my God, you're covering all of it, aren't you? The whole thing." I didn't answer. My silence confirmed everything. "Stella, that's insane. How much have you paid?" "Marcus, how much?" "Almost $250,000. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. $250,000? You've given my parents $250,000, and they have no idea. Meanwhile, my mother tells you you'll never afford their lifestyle. The lifestyle you're literally paying for." Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way my spreadsheets never had. The absurdity, the betrayal, not by the Hartleys, but of myself. I'd betrayed my own future, my own worth, my own marriage, all to maintain a fiction that hurt me every single day. "You have to tell them," Marcus said. "You have to tell David, and you have to tell my parents." "I can't." Your father's health is not your responsibility. Stella, my parents are adults. They made choices, bad choices. They spent money they didn't have, kept up appearances they couldn't afford, and instead of accepting reality, they let you. He stopped, anger and sympathy warring on his face. This isn't fair to you. It's not fair to David. And honestly, it's not even fair to my parents because you're enabling them to keep living in denial. If I stop paying, they'll lose everything. Maybe they should. Maybe that's what needs to happen for them to face reality. He softened slightly. Look, I know that sounds harsh. I love my parents, but this situation is wrong on every level. You're destroying yourself to save them from consequences they need to face. I just got offered a partnership, I said quietly. Career opportunity of a lifetime. I can't take it because the buy-in is $150,000, and I don't have it, because I gave it to your parents. Marcus looked like I'd punched him. Stella, no. Tell me you didn't pass on a partnership because of this. I haven't decided yet. I have 2 weeks. Take the partnership. Stop the payments. Tell David. Tell my parents. Burn this whole dysfunctional arrangement to the ground. His voice was fierce. You've sacrificed enough for a family that doesn't even appreciate what you've done. And when your father's health fails from the stress, when they lose the house, when David has to watch his parents fall apart, then we'll deal with it as a family, like we should have 3 years ago. Stella, you can't save people from themselves. You can only exhaust yourself trying. I drove back to my office in silence, Marcus's words echoing in my head. He was right. I knew he was right, but knowing something intellectually and being able to act on it were different things entirely. My phone buzzed. Text from Barbara. Stella, dear, the contractor is coming Thursday to discuss the renovation plans. We'd love for you and David to be there. 6 o'clock, don't be late. Another mandatory event, another evening of watching the Hartleys plan improvements to a house I was paying for, while Barbara threw subtle insults wrapped in pleasantries. I was so tired. Tired of the secrets, tired of the payments, tired of being looked down on by people who should have been on their knees, thanking me. Marcus was right. I needed to tell the truth. I needed to stop the payments. I needed to choose my own future over their past. But first, I needed to tell David. Because whatever happened next, whatever explosion of truth was coming, my marriage had to survive it. And that meant no more secrets, no more protection, no more sacrifice in silence. Thursday, I decided. After the contractor meeting, after we left his parents' house, I would tell David everything. And then we would face whatever came next together. The question was whether together would survive the truth. Thursday arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of downpour that made driving treacherous and turned the Hartleys' circular driveway into a small lake. I sat in my Honda with the engine running, watching water cascade down the windshield, trying to gather courage for what was coming. Inside that house, I would smile through another meeting about renovations I couldn't afford to subsidize anymore. I would nod politely while Barbara made decisions about granite countertops and custom cabinetry. And then, after we left, I would tell David everything. My phone showed 5:57, 3 minutes until mandatory arrival time. David's text popped up. Already inside, Mom's going crazy with tile samples. Save me. I turned off the engine and ran through the rain, my portfolio bag clutched against my chest. The bag contained something I'd printed that afternoon. 3 years of bank statements, payment records, the full accounting of every dollar I'd sent to keep the Hartley household functioning, just in case. Just in case tonight became the night I couldn't stay silent anymore. Barbara opened the door before I could knock. You're wet. It's raining. Yes, well, the contractor is already here. We're waiting on you. She glanced at my bag with distaste. You brought work? Tonight? Just some papers I needed to review. We walked through the familiar hallway to the dining room, where Richard, David, Marcus, and Lauren sat around the table with a man I assumed was the contractor. Late 50s, expensive suit, tablet already displaying design mock-ups. Stella, finally, Richard said with false cheer. This is Christopher Valdez from Premier Renovations. Christopher, this is our daughter-in-law. Christopher shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd built a business on handshakes. Pleasure to meet you. Your in-laws have excellent taste. These renovation plans are ambitious. Ambitious but necessary, Barbara said, settling into her chair at the head of the table. The kitchen is original to when we bought the house, 32 years outdated. And the master suite simply doesn't reflect the quality of home this is. Christopher pulled up designs on his tablet. We're looking at a complete kitchen gut, custom cabinetry, marble countertops, professional-grade appliances. For the master suite, we're expanding into the current sitting room, adding a spa bathroom, walk-in closets with custom organization systems. He swiped through images that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. Beautiful, expensive, completely unaffordable for people who couldn't pay their own mortgage. Timeline is 4 to 6 months, Christopher continued. We'd start mid-December, work through the winter. You'd need to relocate temporarily. The dust and noise make the house unlivable during major renovation. We're planning to stay at the lake house, Barbara said smoothly. The lake house they'd sold 3 years ago to cover debt. The lake house that no longer existed. I watched Richard's face carefully. Did he remember they'd sold it? Or had the denial become so complete that he'd rewritten his own history? Now, let's discuss investment, Christopher said, pulling up a spreadsheet. With the scope of work you're requesting, we're looking at approximately $380,000 for both projects. That includes materials, labor, permits, and my firm's project management fee. The number hung in the air like a bomb. $380,000. More than I'd already paid over 3 years, more than existed in any account the Hartleys had access to, an impossible sum for people living on credit card debt and hidden subsidies. That seems reasonable, Richard said, not even flinching. Reasonable. $380,000 was reasonable to a man who couldn't make his mortgage payment without my intervention. Dad, Marcus said carefully, that's a significant investment. Have you discussed this with your financial advisor? We're meeting with someone next week, Richard said, waving away the concern. Stella's going to recommend someone to help us organize our accounts, transfer some investments, free up the capital. Every eye in the room turned to me. David looked confused. Marcus looked stricken. He knew exactly what was coming. Lauren, who Marcus must have told about my conversation with him, had gone pale. Mrs. Gonzalez, Christopher said. Your father-in-law mentioned you're a financial consultant. Would you be helping with the renovation financing? My voice caught. I don't think... Stella's very good with money, Barbara interrupted, her tone dripping with condescension, though I'm sure this level of financial planning is somewhat beyond her usual scope. Our family has more complex needs than her typical clients. Something snapped inside me. 3 years of silence, 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of watching this woman look down on me while I literally paid for her life. Actually, I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. I'm intimately familiar with the Hartley family's financial situation, more familiar than anyone else in this room. Richard smiled, oblivious. Well, that's wonderful. Then you understand the kind of portfolio management required for... I understand that you haven't made a mortgage payment with your own money in 3 years. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. I'm sorry, Barbara's voice was ice. The mortgage on this house, the one you're planning to renovate for $380,000, you haven't paid it yourself since January 2022. I opened my portfolio bag with shaking hands. Would you like to see the payment records? David stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. Stella, what are you talking about? I pulled out the bank statements, the spreadsheets, 3 years of documentation. I'm talking about the fact that I've been paying your parents' mortgage since March of 2022, along with their property taxes, their country club dues, your father's car payment, and various credit card minimums to keep collection agencies from calling. That's absurd, Barbara said, but her voice wavered. Is it? I spread the papers across the table, covering Christopher's beautiful renovation plans. January 2022. I found foreclosure notices in your husband's office. You were 4 months behind, $87,000 delinquent. I paid it, and then I kept paying, every month, for 3 years. Richard had gone gray. Stella, I don't understand. Those payments came from our account. I saw the statements. They came from my business account, processed through your bank to look like they originated from you. The bank manager helped me set it up so you wouldn't know. I found Helen Pritchard's number in my phone, held it up. Call her. Ask her where the payments have been coming from. Why would you... David's voice cracked. Why would you do this without telling me? Because 3 years ago, your parents were about to lose everything. Your father's investments had failed. They were drowning in medical debt. And I found out by accident when your dad asked me to get tax documents from his office. I looked at David, tears burning my eyes. I couldn't let you watch your childhood home get foreclosed on. I couldn't put that stress on your father's heart. So I paid. I paid, and I kept paying, and I never told you because I was trying to protect you. Barbara had found her voice, sharp and defensive. This is ridiculous. We don't need your charity. We never asked for— No, you didn't ask. You just kept spending, kept up appearances, kept telling me I'd never afford your lifestyle while I was literally paying for it. I pulled out the total summary, the one that showed every payment, every sacrifice. $248,350. That's how much of my money has gone into keeping this house, this life, this illusion functional. The number seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. $250,000, Marcus said quietly. Jesus Christ. Christopher Valdez cleared his throat. I'm thinking this might not be the best time for renovation discussions. He gathered his tablet and left, smart enough to recognize a family implosion when he saw one. Barbara stood up, her chair scraping harshly. How dare you? How dare you come into our home and make these accusations, throw around numbers, try to humiliate us? Accusations? I stood too, 3 years of anger finally finding its voice. These aren't accusations, Barbara. These are bank statements. These are canceled checks. This is documentation of every time I saved you from your own financial disaster while you looked down your nose at me. If this is true, Richard's voice was barely a whisper. If this is true, then why? Why would you help us if we never asked? Because I loved your son. Because I thought I was protecting your family. Because I was stupid enough to believe that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, maybe eventually you'd see my worth. I looked at Barbara. But you never did you? Even while I was paying your bills, you were telling me I'd never afford your lifestyle that literally wouldn't exist without me. You should have told us, Barbara said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. She looked smaller, suddenly, older. You're right. I should have. I should have let you face the consequences of your choices 3 years ago. I should have let the bank foreclose. I should have let your country club membership lapse. I should have let the whole carefully constructed lie collapse. I gathered my papers. But I didn't. I saved you. And you thanked me by treating me like I wasn't good enough to breathe the same air. David hadn't said anything since the initial revelation. He sat frozen, staring at the bank statements like they were written in code he couldn't crack. David, I said softly, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I thought I was protecting you, but Marcus was right. I was just enabling them. And it cost us. It cost us our savings, our future, My voice broke. I got offered a partnership, career opportunity of a lifetime. I can't take it because the buy-in is $150,000, and I don't have it because I gave that money and more to your parents. He looked up at me then, and the hurt in his eyes was devastating. You've been doing this for 3 years. 3 years. Stella, we've been married, shared a life, shared a bed, and you never told me you were bankrupting us to save my parents. I wasn't bankrupting us. I was managing it. You were lying to me every day. Every time I asked why we couldn't afford a house or a vacation or why you worked such long hours, you lied. I was trying to protect you. From what? From knowing my parents needed help, from the truth. He stood up, his hands shaking. You didn't trust me. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth, to let me help make decisions about our money, our future. You just decided all by yourself that my parents' dignity was worth more than our partnership. He was right. God, he was right. I'd betrayed him just as much as his parents had betrayed themselves. Marry Mrs. Hartley, Lauren said quietly, speaking for the first time. She was an accountant, practical and direct. You need to hire a financial advisor immediately, not to organize your assets, to manage your debt. You're insolvent. You have been for years. And if Stella stops making these payments, you'll need to make serious changes. Probably sell this house, downsize significantly, eliminate all non-essential expenses. Sell the house? Barbara's voice was hollow. This is the Hartley home. David grew up here. Marcus grew up here. We've been here 32 years. Then you should have lived within your means, Marcus said bluntly. Mom, Dad, I love you, but this is insane. You've been living on Stella's money while treating her like she's beneath us. You've been planning renovations you can't afford. You joined boards and clubs and kept up appearances that were destroying you financially. And instead of admitting the problem, you let Stella sacrifice her future to maintain your present. We didn't know, Richard said weakly. Would it have mattered if you did? I asked. Would you have stopped spending? Would you have downsized? Or would you have just accepted my money as your due while continuing to judge me for not having enough? No one answered. The rain pounded against the windows, the only sound in the terrible silence. I'm stopping the payments, I said finally, effective immediately. I'll send you the documentation of everything I've paid so you can update your financial records. What you do next is your choice. Sell the house, talk to your accountant, file for bankruptcy. I don't care anymore. But I'm done enabling this. Stella, Richard said, and for the first time I heard genuine fear in his voice. Please, if you stop the payments, you'll face the consequences you should have faced 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Richard. I genuinely am. But I can't save you anymore. I can't save you at the cost of everything I've worked for. I looked at David one more time. I'll be at my parents' house if you want to talk, but I understand if you don't. I walked out of the Hartley house for the last time, leaving behind 3 years of secrets, sacrifice, and the family that had never appreciated either. 3 days later, I sat in my parents' living room, my mother's arm around my shoulders, while my phone buzzed with ignored calls from Barbara's number. David had come to talk the night I left. We'd sat in my parents' backyard until 2 a.m, him asking questions, me answering with the painful honesty I should have offered 3 years earlier. He was hurt, angry, betrayed. But underneath it all, he loved me. And he was starting to understand why I'd made the choices I'd made, even if he couldn't forgive them yet. I need time, he'd said. I need to process this. But Stella, we're married. That means something. It means we work through this, together, no more secrets. Marcus had called too. They're selling the house. Dad's talking to a realtor tomorrow. They'll downsize to a condo, something they can actually afford. Mom's devastated, but she'll survive. They both will. A pause. What you did was wrong, Stella. Keeping secrets from David, enabling their denial. But what they did to you was worse, and I want you to know that I see that. The partnership offer was still on my desk, the deadline looming. Thomas Chen had called, concerned about my delay. Stella, opportunities like this don't wait. What's holding you back? Everything? Nothing? The wreckage of 3 years of lies and the possibility of a future I could finally choose for myself. I need to make a call, I told my mother, extracting myself from her embrace. I dialed Thomas Chen. I'm accepting the partnership. I'll have the buy-in funds within 60 days. I need to liquidate some investments, but I'll make it work. That's wonderful news, Stella. We're thrilled to have you. After I hung up, Anna appeared with coffee. So you're doing it. Taking the job? I'm taking the job. And David and I are going to counseling, and I'm going to rebuild everything I sacrificed for people who never appreciated the sacrifice. What about the Hartleys? They'll figure it out, or they won't. But either way, it's not my responsibility anymore. My phone buzzed again. This time it was David. Can we talk tonight? I'm not ready to come home yet, but I'm ready to start figuring out what home means for us now. I typed back. Yes, we'll figure it out together. Because that's what I should have done 3 years ago. Not protected him, not shielded him, not sacrificed in silence, just partnered with him, honestly, openly, as equals. The Hartley family would recover, or they wouldn't. Barbara would learn humility, or she wouldn't. Richard would face reality, or he wouldn't. But none of that was my burden to carry anymore. I'd spent 3 years paying for their lifestyle while being told I'd never afford it. Now I was going to build my own lifestyle, one where my worth wasn't measured by how much I could give, but by how much I valued myself. And this time I was going to do it with my eyes open, my secrets shared, and my future firmly in my own hands. The Hartleys had taught me an expensive lesson. You can't buy respect from people who've decided you're not worthy of it, but you can buy your own freedom, your own future, your own life. And that's exactly what I intended to do. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.